My name is Max, and today I'll be discussing Rebecca Ray's book, Small Habits for a Big Life. Release the self-sabotaging behavior that is holding you back, one habit at a time. Rebecca Ray is a clinical psychologist and author of several books. The book explores how self-sabotaging can negatively impact our life. The book conveys that we can achieve happiness and a deep sense of meaning when our habits are aligned with our values. Today, we'll discuss the book in depth, summarizing the key ideas in each chapter. The first chapter is titled Self-Sabotage, Why Do We Do It? And in this chapter, you comment on how, as human beings, we're wired to reduce our discomfort as much as possible. Why, from an evolutionary point of view, are we wired to reduce discomfort as much as possible?
So when we're talking about an evolutionary perspective, we're talking about survival. We're talking about a species over time that has been wired to listen to our discomfort, because once upon a time it meant that our life would continue. So if we were roaming the savannah in clans and we had discomfort that showed up in the form of thirst or hunger, then listening to that discomfort is obviously very, very positive for our survival.
Yeah.
It's also positive because there were so many threats back then to our survival that we're in a position where if you didn't listen to that discomfort, you ran the risk of your life being ended prematurely. Or
what sort of key examples of discomfort from like an evolutionary standpoint? Hello?
Sorry, that's what I was just talking about. So when we're looking at this discomfort, we're looking at access to resources, we're looking at access to information, we're looking at access to belonging with the clan and the chance to reproduce. If we ignore the discomfort of any anxiety that shows up, then we're in a place where we run the risk of being kicked out of the clan or rejected on some level or even killed. So we've actually evolved as a species to very much be warriors, very much to listen to those negative thoughts in our head that tell us that, oh my goodness, there could be a problem here. And that problem bias or that negativity bias means that we have discomfort and we want to run away from that discomfort today. But the way that that works now is that we sometimes confuse discomfort for growth versus discomfort that we should just avoid, because the problem is that we can't grow unless we have some kind of discomfort.
Okay, so later in the chapter, you go on to say that the fear system in your brain responds from a place of self-protection. To reduce discomfort, there are two parts of the brain that we are interested when it comes to self-defeating habits. So there's the left, the prefrontal cortex, and the limbic system. So what's the role of the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system with regard to fear and avoiding discomfort?
So the limbic system is a really old part of the brain that's designed to help us to survive by activating our fight-flight response. So it puts us in a position where we are primed through changes in our body and our neurochemistry to be able to run away from the threat or fight the threat or even shut down so that we don't make ourselves look like prey. The left prefrontal cortex kicks in to help us order our behavior. So the left prefrontal cortex does logical, rational thinking. It does planning, decision making, and it also makes sure that our behavior is socially appropriate. Now, when it comes to self-sabotage, which I discuss in Small Habits for a Big Life, what tends to happen is our limbic system becomes overwhelmed, because to unravel habits of self-sabotage, we need to get uncomfortable. But instead, we stay in a place where we're fixed on self-protection. And that's when we're listening to that limbic system and saying, oh my goodness, I can't possibly be uncomfortable, so I'm just going to continue doing these unhelpful habits.
Okay. Later in the chapter, you discuss the cycle of self-sabotage, describing that first we experience a trigger, and the trigger always comes in some form of discomfort. So what's like the most common discomfort trigger you're aware of?
I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
I think it really depends on the person, and I think it depends on their situation, because sometimes a trigger that's incredibly uncomfortable could be a memory, it could be a thought, it could be a feeling. I mean, most people are probably more aware of their feelings than anything else, so we probably listen to emotional discomfort first. Um, but it can be anything from as mild as boredom to as intense as chronic anxiety.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and you say in this process, our brains reward the avoidance of discomfort by releasing neurochemical called dopamine. So dopamine motivates us to repeat a behavior by rewarding us with the feeling of positive satisfaction. So how can we avoid succumbing to relief of self-sabotaging behaviors?
I don't I don't necessarily think it's a case that we can completely avoid self-sabotage, especially if you find that you've
Mm,
developed habits of self-sabotage. I think we
mm,
probably need to be more compassionate with ourselves than that.
mm.
So perhaps it's a case of understanding that there will be times where you'll self-sabotage because those strategies actually work. They actually work to decrease your discomfort in the present moment. The problem is when we're looking for long-term growth, we need to know which discomfort to be able to accept. So I would encourage people to be focused on the outcome that they're looking for and to work on strategies for minimizing the harm they're doing to themselves in the present moment. So perhaps rather than eating the entire cake in the fridge, maybe one of your strategies is to drink a glass of water first. Maybe one of your strategies is to go for a walk and to soothe your emotions in some other way.
Yeah. All right. So the process is trigger, self-sabotage, feel guilty and out of alignment, which causes to repeat self-sabotage actions. So does acting on the cycle repeatedly exacerbate it and make it harder to get out of the situation or out of the cycle?
Yeah, I mean, any habit that we do over and over again gets more strongly wired into our brains. So the longer you've been doing something, the harder it is to change it. That doesn't make it impossible. It just means that brains like doing what's familiar, so they continue doing that.
Okay. And yeah, so you in this chapter you say when it comes to changing habits, the worst thing you can do is start with an overwhelming goal or of changing too many things at once. So where should one start when embarking on a changing a habit?
Start with your why. Start with what's
Yeah,
important to you. I
yeah,
think when you come back to what's the value behind this habit, then that helps you to really move forward to stay connected to future you and the type of life you're trying to create rather
mm,
than the life you're living right now that doesn't look exactly as you would like it to be.
oh yeah. Yeah, so you also comment on the necessity of going gently. So when you decide to change your habit, so going gently involves radical self-compassion that honors the role of habits of self-sabotage in your life as a protection strategy while still holding the belief in your potential to become who you desire to be. So how does one go about being gently with their goals and adopting radical self-compassion?
I think radical self compassion, radical acceptance is a process and a practice. It's not necessarily something we come to easily, especially if you've grown up with a lot of negative self talk and you're
Mm,
used to being highly self critical. So I think what I would say to listeners is where to start is start by speaking to yourself as you would a friend.
mm,
Because you'd very rarely say the things to a friend that you're actually saying to yourself about your unhelpful habits.
yeah, I agree. And in the pursuit of changing our habits, you say that all forward progress is ultimately a squiggle rather than a straight line. How
Mhm.
can one maintain perseverance without being discouraged by the up and down nature of making progress towards one's goals?
I think something really powerful around that is community. It's
Yeah,
sometimes
so a
we can
support network.
support network, and
Yeah,
sometimes you can create a visual reminder of your progress that can
mm,
be ticking off when you do the habit
yeah,
each
like
day.
are you crossing off a list? I
Yeah,
think.
exactly. Or being in a position where you actually compare results from a month ago to results that you're getting today. I do think that it's brains are more likely to pick us apart than they are to encourage us. So that support network can be really helpful, but it can also
Mm,
be really helpful to give yourself conscious evidence that you
Yeah.
are actually changing.
Okay. Towards the end of this chapter, you describe the 6 stages of change. So I'll describe one and then you can describe the next. So first of all, there's pre-contemplation. So the stage where a problem exists, but we remain in denial about it. The second is contemplation. So how would you describe this second stage in making change?
Contemplation is the stage where you are considering the possibility that you might have a problem, but you're
Hmm.
not necessarily quite at a place where you're ready to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Okay. Thirdly, there's preparation. So the stage where we accept there is a problem, but are not ready to do anything about it. And the next one is action. So how would you describe action?
Actions where we're actually doing something about it.
Yep. Great. Fifthly, there's maintenance. So the stage where the change has been embedded into our way of being. And then the last one is relapse. So how would you describe relapse?
Relapse is actually probably the most common stage of all. It's where we make the change and then something shifts within us and we end up recycling old habits, going back to old patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. So repeating the old habits. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the second chapter, you kind of focus on finding your why. And you say to live an expansive, inspired life, we need to take actions in line with our values, which means realigning our habits to fit the things that are most important to us. So, why are values so important if one wants to live an expansive and inspired life?
Because values sit as the foundation of what we want to stand for. So they help us stay connected with
Hmm.
what we want our life to look like. Imagine if you get to have a conversation with your 80-year-old self. You want your 80-year-old self to look back and go, you did really good, kid. Like you actually lived a life that we can be proud of. Your
Hmm.
values set the foundation for that.
Is there a relationship between someone's values and habits?
Yeah,
Or,
there
yeah.
is. There is. Although sometimes that relationship can become misaligned. So oftentimes our values are enduring, they don't really change.
Hmm.
But once that doesn't mean that we don't end up developing unhelpful habits. I mean, you can have a value of living with vitality and being active and not get off the couch. You can
Yeah.
have a value of living a creative life, and yet the last time you painted was in preschool,
Yeah.
assuming painting is your outlet for your creativity. So you don't necessarily need habits that support your values in order to have values, but
Hmm.
you'll get so much more life satisfaction if your habits do support your values.
Hmm. Yes. Okay. And you say later in the chapter, in these times, we take action based on what gives us relief rather than what is consistent with who we want to be. And these two things can often be very different. So, why is it so important to conquer our emotions in the process of achieving our desired habits and living in alignment with our goals?
I don't think we need to conquer our emotions. I think we
Yeah.
need to learn to respond effectively to them, because sometimes when discomfort shows up, we don't have control over that. We can't necessarily turn it off.
Hmm.
And sometimes one of the most unhelpful things that we end up doing is the attempt to dampen that emotion or turn it off. So instead, I think our power lies in how we respond to those feelings. What do we choose to do in the time that that feeling shows up?
Hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And also in the chapter, you compare values and goals. You say that values represent the overall direction where we're heading in life, while our goals are the accomplishments we can tick off along the way. Values are an ongoing process without an endpoint. Goals can be measured and completed even if they take a while to achieve. So, how should one orientate their goals in relation to their values?
Um, think of goals
Mm,
as a waypoint in the direction of your values. So if you think of your values as like heading west, but
mm,
your goals are the mountains and the rivers and the various towns that you pass through on the way to heading west, you
yeah.
never actually get west, but your goals are the things that you actually tick
So,
off along
so
the
yeah,
way.
you're heading in the direction, but there's no final endpoint with
Yes,
values. Yeah.
yes, that's right.
Yeah. And you go on to stress that, that we need to find our why. Um, it's the why that keeps us going. It's the why that will help you pursue goals. how does one go about finding their why?
Um,
I think you say like it has something to do with pain, but like why does pain shine a light on what's important to us?
yeah, so I think the key there is being able to look on the other side of the coin of what's important to you. And if you don't know what's important to you, have a think about the areas of your life that you want to improve, because they're showing you what's misaligned. So if someone, let's go back to the creative person again. Let's say someone has a really deep value of being creative and they have worked in such a way or existed in such a way that creativity hasn't been part of their life. Perhaps because we're facing a cost of living crisis and they've simply been in the pattern of surviving for a long period of time. If you think about not being creative and all the times you've missed out exploring those pursuits, that pain shows you how important creativity is to you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the next chapter is chapter 3. You discuss the importance of SMART goals. So you state that the bridge between where you are currently and where you want to be is made of goals. So we'll just go through the SMART, an acronym. So S stands for specific, specify the particular actions you'll take, where you'll take them, who or what is involved, and how you'll measure your progress. So then there's M. M stands for meaningful. What to you is a meaningful goal?
A meaningful goal is something that actually resonates with the person rather than a goal that they're doing just because someone else wants them to.
So it has to be intrinsic.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Thirdly, A stands for adaptive. So is the goal going to take you where you want to go? Will it help you take your life forward in a direction that is consistent with your being and isn't likely to improve the quality of your life? And then fourthly, there's R, is realistic. So what's a realistic goal?
Something that you can actually work towards achieving. I mean, there's no point in deciding that you want to be an astronaut if you're 50 and you've never studied physics. Like there needs to be some. It can be just out of your comfort zone for sure, but it still needs to be something that is actually possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then finally, T in SMART stands for time limited. This means that you need to set a date, and time by which you want to achieve the goal. In relation to goals, you stress the importance of reviewing your goals. You describe a 3-step process that includes reviewing, reassessing, resetting. So to review means to look at your goals regularly. Just to review them. So why is reviewing goals so important in relation to achieving them?
Because goals aren't set and forget. And I think sometimes life gets in the way and we get so busy that we can actually forget that we're in a process of working towards a goal. So it's really important to keep goals at the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, how does this differ from the second step, which is reassessing? So how does one make an appropriate assessment of their goals or reassessment of their
I don't
goals?
know. You're testing me on all the content of my book. I don't know. I've written an entire book since then.
That's all
I
right.
don't remember what the difference between that step is and the other one, but I'm sure it's in the book.
I think reviewing is kind of being aware of it. Reassessing is probably more thinking about how you're going to change it. I don't know. I'm not too sure, but and then the final step is reset. So, yeah,
Yeah. So I think reviewing is just making sure that the goal's still in place. Reassessing is making sure it's working. And then resetting is if it's not working, making the adjustments that you need to.
yeah. Okay. Chapter 4 is titled "Be Ready to Never Feel Ready." You say an unfortunate but seductive psychological defense is that we will one day feel ready. Can we ever feel ready, or are we always going to feel a bit of uncertainty in regards to our readiness? Is it best just to start straight away, irrelevant of how ready we feel?
Yeah, I think readiness is a myth. So I think we can get very seduced by this idea that we will start on Monday or we'll start on the first of the month or we'll start on the 1st of January and then we'll be ready to actually do the thing. The key is that humans are never really ready to face discomfort. We just need to go ahead and create action so that our brain develops those neural pathways for new evidence that we can do things differently.
Okay. And yeah, in this chapter, you talk about being ready for habits, but also that rewiring our brains to be able to create new and aligned habits means also facing discomfort willingly and learning that there are other healthier ways that we can meet our needs. During the learning process, brains are usually very reluctant to participate in change. They like to follow neural pathways that they already know to continue doing what they have been doing. So why do we like to repeat habits and behaviors that we're familiar with?
Because brains love doing what they know. So once we actually build those neural pathways that say this is what we do in this scenario or in response to this feeling or this thought or this memory, brains like to continue traveling on those same neural pathways. And usually we don't do things unless they work. So when I'm talking about working, though, I'm talking about working in the short term when it comes to self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is what we do as a coping strategy right now that helps to make us feel better. But that thing that we're doing today probably won't help us next week or next month or next year.
Okay. All right, so the next topic in this chapter is motivation. So you said there are 3 different types of motivation: external motivation, goal-based motivation, and process or journey-based motivation. So firstly, external motivation is motivation that you experience to avoid a negative outcome or consequence coming from some kind of force outside yourself. So is external motivation an undesirable form of motivation because it's not inspired by personal motives?
Look, I don't know whether we'll call it undesirable. I just think that it often shows up in situations where we haven't necessarily chosen it. So, there are many kids who don't go to school because they want to. They go to school because they have to.
Yeah,
And the outcome of that is an education. There are many people who don't go to their job because they love their job. They go to their job because they need a paycheck to pay
yeah,
their
pay
bills.
bills. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there can definitely be undesirable elements to it. I guess motivation is just more powerful when it's intrinsic.
Yeah. So secondly, goal-based motivation is motivation that we follow that is tied only to an outcome. So are we motivated throughout the entirety of the goal, or does it just come in sparks?
No, I think you can be motivated towards the entirety of the goal. There will always be discomfort. My brother was the first person to cross Bass Strait on a stand-up paddleboard, and
Oh, wow.
he that's a random goal, right? Like it's just so
It's just a means to an end once you achieve
exactly,
it. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so he was doing it to raise money for charity, and the money for the charity motivated him, and also just the "can I do it"
Yeah,
motivated
just
him.
doing the task. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But
Yeah.
once it's done, he's not going to repeat that.
Yeah. And then finally, there's process-based motivation, which is motivation that is fueled by the journey itself. So it means that we focus on the process, the daily efforts towards something meaningful, the satisfaction of overcoming small problems and challenges as they occur along the way, and the little wins that bring us closer to a larger goal. So is this the best and most effective form of motivation?
It is for overcoming unhelpful habits. Yeah. It is for actually changing anything in our lives, because when we're changing things to do with our human behavior, usually that takes quite a significant amount of time. Think months, not days. And so we need process-based motivation because that keeps us going longer. It helps us to celebrate the little wins along the way.
Okay, cool. And then I think towards the end of the chapter, you talk about this process of how to change. So you talk about what you can and can't control and where you should focus your attention. So why is understanding what you can and can't control so important when making changes, goal changes?
I think it's important because sometimes we try to control the uncontrollables and then we get thrown off track because we can't. So, for instance, we have this initial spark of motivation at the beginning, and then after that, we end up in a place where we feel uncomfortable, we feel tired, we're bored with the pursuit of the goal, and those feelings, because they can't be controlled, destabilize us. So I think it's really important to focus on what you can control, which is your actions rather than your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. So in the how to change cycle, there's 4 steps. So first is attitude, go gently. Then there's approach, then there's process, and then there's permission. Could you just tell us a brief bit about each step, or maybe just the whole cycle in general?
So the whole cycle is generally about how you actually approach the change process rather than being rigid about it. I think my approach is far more gentle than most other people's. Most other people's, well, I can't say most. I mean, there's just so much out there on social media that's rigid and sets people up for these 8-week challenges and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff that I think leads people to jump out of the gate well and then fall off the wagon and feel bad about themselves. My entire approach is for people to be compassionate with their human parts, the imperfect parts that will show up, and not to end up criticizing themselves just because they get off track, because we all will.
Hmm. Yeah, and back to motivation, you talk about whilst momentum can create motivation, how do we maintain consistency when we don't get like a dopamine hit? Like, how do we act on habits that are in alignment with our goals when we don't necessarily feel like doing them?
That's simply to have other keys in place that can keep you inspired. So that might be in community, it might be some sense of accountability, it might be someone encouraging you, it could be a reward that you're giving yourself, that's obviously not harmful to the process.
Okay. So in chapter 5, it's called Creating and Sustaining New Habits. You describe a threefold habit cycle consisting of a cue, then a routine, and finally a reward. You say that the habit cycle unfolds like this. A cue or set of cues in your environment and or within yourself occurs that triggers the brain to respond by choosing from a suite of automatic behaviors. Uh, these behaviors are called routines. The cues determine which routine is chosen, and the brain essentially switches into automatic mode. The routine then occurs. This is where we carry out automatic behavior that the brain chooses in response to the cue. Can you give me an example of a habit which involves this process? So the cue, the routine, and the reward process.
So the cue could be, if you're developing, say, a habit of running, the cue would be leaving your shoes out where you can see them, getting your running clothes ready, your water
Yeah,
bottle and your keys ready to go.
yeah.
The routine is when you put all your stuff on and you're out the door before you've even thought about it. And the reward would be your favorite smoothie at the end.
Okay, that's a good example. And
Max, I just need to let you know, I have another meeting in about 10 minutes. So I just have to go in about 10.
okay, maybe we can finish it later. Is that all right, or do you just do? What do you think?
Can you just maybe ask me one more question from each chapter rather than 3 or 4?
Okay, I'll just scroll to it. All right. So you talk about the replenishing your willpower bucket. So what is the relevance of willpower when it comes to habit change and self-sabotaging behaviors?
Willpower is the muscle that we need to be able to do hard things, and hard things are changing habits. But willpower gets drained as we ask ourselves to do demands throughout the day. So we need to remember that that
Hmm.
bucket of willpower is drained quite easily. So there are ways that we can refill our willpower bucket in order to make sure that we have enough willpower to do the hard thing. And that's things like, make sure that you're eating well, make sure that you're sleeping and resting, make sure that you're not multitasking.
Hmm.
Focus on single tasking instead. Try to reduce the decisions that you have to make in order to be able to do the new habit. And if you can, try to work to your circadian rhythms. So we tend to have the most willpower at the beginning of the day. So if you can, try to do the hardest thing first thing.
Okay, I'll just do one question from each chapter, and then. So
Sure.
how many more questions do you want me to do? 3 or 4, or what do
Yeah,
you?
that's fine. Yeah,
Okay, I'll just do one from each.
sure.
So chapter 7 discusses managing negative feelings. So you talk about our culture's obsession with happiness makes our day-to-day experience of emotions confusing. We're socialized to believe that if we have uncomfortable feelings, there must be something wrong with us. So what is bad about our culture's obsession with happiness?
I think it's bad because it sets us up to think that there's something wrong with us when we don't feel happy. And yet, the actual nature of human beings is that we feel across an entire rainbow of feelings. And we need to accept that in order to understand that if you're not feeling happy all the time, there's actually nothing wrong with you. It could just be that life is hard right now.
Okay. And you also talk about, how we tend to avoid discomfort. So you say avoiding them is not working for you because it only leads you to have more pain in the long term. So why does avoiding uncomfortable feelings lead to more pain in the long term?
Because essentially what you're doing is going for short-term relief. So you're trying to band-aid the feeling today, but that stops you from being able to shift and move in a direction that will take you in towards your values, to create a life that's consistent with the life that you want to live. So the more you avoid discomfort now, the more it stops you from growing in the future.
Okay. And you talk about a strategy that we need to become aware of what our mind is saying without entering into a struggle with it and without judgment. So how can we remain distant with our mind and avoid struggling with it? What strategy?
The best thing to do is to not believe everything that you think. So minds are often far more melodramatic than what we actually think. Than what reality is. So we sometimes experience reality as being far more intense because our mind is making it that way. So I would just like listeners to be able to check in with the stories that they're telling themselves, because those stories may not be accurate.
Yeah, and you talk about in regards to changing your goals that it's important to have a community. So when it comes to changing an unhelpful habit, it's often more easily done as a part of a group. So how can a group help us positively? How can a group positively influence our habits?
Um, okay, so there's three different types of support
Yeah, so
that
there's accountability person, encouraging person, and people who are on the same path, I think.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's really great to have, first of all, an accountability person who's going to call you on your shit, basically. The person who's going to remind you that you actually need to do the thing no matter what your excuses are. Your encouragement person is the person that's going to back you and remind you how well you're doing. And the people who are on the same path are the ones that are going to be experiencing the hard bits too. But they're also the people that might be further down the path than you that you can use for inspiration.
You also say, as you embark on this journey to create new habits for a bigger life, the reality is that not everyone will be supportive of the changes you're trying to make. So some people will be threatened by your growth because it holds up a mirror in which they are forced to look themselves. How can we avoid the negativity of others and not be influenced by it?
I think it's really important to remember that not everyone will grow at the same pace as you. And so sometimes, in order to grow into the version of ourselves that we really desire, we need to understand that some people will be threatened by that. And so sometimes distance between you and that person is effective. And sometimes we need to let people go when they're not actually willing to invest or embrace the new version of ourselves.
Okay, so we'll do one more question. Do you have
Sure.
time just for one more or?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so you talk about radical responsibility is about recognizing that if nothing changes, nothing changes. And nothing changes if we don't acknowledge our role in keeping ourselves stuck. Nothing changes if we don't acknowledge the effort needed to create change. Nothing changes if we refuse to accept the discomfort of change. So how can we promote taking action?
Um, how can we promote taking action? I mean, my answer to that is just do the thing. But
Yeah,
I think deeper than that, we need to remind ourselves that it's not going to be a straight line. It simply means that we need to look in the mirror and understand no one else is coming. It's up to us to actually change our lives.
yeah, because you talk about the essential elements of change is cultivation of self-trust, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And the more you do the thing, the more you actually build evidence in your brain that you can do the thing. So the more you're able to actually trust yourself.
And yeah, is it value directed? Promotes self-trust? Why is it that value directed action reaffirms self-trust?
Because values directed action is the proof that you can actually go in the direction that you want to go. Self-sabotaging action erodes self-trust because we're repeating unhelpful habits.
Yeah, we'll just do one more question and then we'll finish it off. You talk about there's emotional relapse, mental relapse, and physical relapse. What are the best strategies to prevent this from happening and stay on track?
I think the There are so many strategies in that
Mm.
section of the book that instead, to wrap it up for listeners, I would really encourage them to expect to fail. But that doesn't mean they're a failure. It means that we all change in a very messy line. And that line is a knot rather than a straight line. So if you expect to fail, when you do fall off track, you can bring yourself back on track by getting support, by revising your goals, by seeing if there's anything else you need to help you on the path, rather than making the failure mean something about you.
Okay, thank you. I think that sums it up. You don't have any more time? You've got to go to your next appointment.
I have to go to my next appointment. Yeah, I'm sorry, but everyone can find more of my work if they want to dive in at rebeccaray.com.au. And all my books are available in all good bookstores and online retailers.
Absolutely. And if you want in the future, I'm happy to do another podcast with another one of your books, if that's
okay. Great.
If you're happy to do that.
Great. Thanks so much, Max.
No worries, Rebecca. Thank you very much for doing the interview.
My pleasure. Have a nice day.
You too. Have a nice day.
See ya.
See you. Bye.